Hello, I'm Bryony and I work with the Egyptian collection at Macclesfield Museums. Today I'm going to be answering all the questions that people have sent in about mummies. Amelia from Year 3 wants to know, have you ever seen a real mummy? And yes, I've seen a number of different mummies in different museums. And actually, one of my earliest museum memories is when I was on a school trip and I got lost because I spent too long looking at the mummy of a man and his facial reconstruction, which showed what he would have looked like when he was alive. And I think that this was an important moment for me because I'd been interested in ancient Egypt for a long time before this, but it was only really seeing the facial reconstruction of this man and his body that made me really think about the human side of ancient Egypt, because before that, I was only very young, and I was always thinking about ancient Egypt in terms of, great discoveries like the tomb of Tutankhamun and all of the gold. And it was only when faced with the human side of ancient Egypt in the form of this mummy that I began to care more about the lives of the ancient Egyptians rather than great discoveries. And I think that's really important, that you remember when you see mummies in museums and when you think about ancient Egypt, that the ancient Egyptians were people like us who had thoughts and feelings and ideas rather than just discoveries to be made. The next question is from Harvey in Year 3, and he wants to know, do you have a mummy in Macclesfield? And this is an interesting question because we have a mummy case, but the mummy that was inside it was left behind in Egypt. But fortunately, we can actually find out a lot about the person who was buried in the mummy case through the inscriptions and designs on the mummy case itself. So we know that it belonged to a priestess who lived just under 3,000 years ago, and her name was Shebmut, and she had the title Singer in the Interior of Amen, and that meant that she was allowed to go into the innermost parts of the Temple of Amen, which was this really important temple in Thebes. And not very many people were allowed to go so far into the temple, so she was quite important in that way. Evie from Year 4 asks, what animals did they mummify? Well, there are lots of different types of animal mummies from ancient Egypt, because the ancient Egyptians used to mummify animals for lots of different reasons. The most obvious reason to us nowadays is when the ancient Egyptians used to mummify their pets. So we have some dogs and cats, and even some more unusual animals like baboons, that were mummified and buried with their owners in their tombs or close by. But actually, pets are only a very small amount of the animal mummies that we have from ancient Egypt. Most animal mummies were made for a very different reason. So if you imagine that you're back in ancient Egypt, particularly in the late period, which is about 2,500 years ago, and you want to give an offering to one of the gods. Well, one thing that you could give to them would be an animal mummy. Now, if you think about the ancient Egyptian gods, a lot of them had animal forms or animal heads. So, for example, you would give a cat mummy to the cat goddess Bastet, or a crocodile mummy to the crocodile god Sobek. Now, it might seem a bit strange to us that these animal gods would want dead, mummified versions of the animals that they looked like, but that seems to be how it was. And you would give an animal mummy to one of these gods if you wanted the god to be on your side and act on your behalf. These animal mummy offerings were then buried in catacombs, where thousands of years later, archaeologists found all of these millions of animal mummies that each represented a prayer from each of these offering givers. And these are the types of animal mummies that we have in Macclesfield. So we have an ibis mummy, which is a type of bird, a hawk mummy, cat mummy, and a crocodile mummy. But actually things aren't quite that simple, because the cat mummy looks from the outside like a complete cat, but actually only contains the leg of a cat. And the same goes for the crocodile mummy. The crocodile mummy looks like a full crocodile, but actually it's just got bits and pieces of different crocodiles in it, like a scale and a jawbone. It's not a full crocodile. And this is actually not unusual. Most animal mummies actually only have part or none of an actual animal inside them. One possible reason for this is maybe they thought that a little bit of the animal, or even just the shape of the animal, was enough to do the job. On a more practical level, it would have also meant that the priests who made and sold these animal mummies to visitors to the temples wouldn't have actually needed as many dead animals to make mummies out of, which is always a nice thing. Other less common types of animal mummies include food mummies, where there are joints of meat and poultry that were buried with dead people for them to eat in the afterlife. And there are also animal mummies that were the mummies of specific sacred animals, for example the Apis bulls, which were thought to be an incarnation of the god Ptah. These were recognisable by special markings that they had, and they were treated very well, and when they died they were mummified and buried in these huge inscribed sarcophagi, and they're so big and impressive that when I went to see them I couldn't actually see fully in them, even though I was on my tiptoes on top of a step. They were that big. Thank you for watching. Join me next time and I'll be answering some more of your questions.